It started not with a sound, but with silence. A silence so deep it felt alive. The kind that exists only thousands of miles from land, where the Pacific stretches out like a black mirror and swallows everything in its path. It was March 1968. Somewhere in that endless ocean, beneath 3 miles of water, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine slipped beneath the waves and never came back. The submarine was called K-129, a Golf II-class vessel that carried 3 nuclear-tipped missiles in its hull. Its mission was routine: patrol the northern Pacific, remain undetected, and wait for orders that everyone hoped would never come. But on a cold night in early March, every Soviet listening station monitoring its route heard something they couldn't explain. A low-frequency roar, a metallic groan, and then nothing. No distress call, no coordinates, just absence. For the Soviet Navy, that silence was terrifying. K-129 was one of their crown jewels, a mobile nuclear weapon system designed to ensure that even if the United States struck first, the Soviet Union could still strike back. Losing contact with it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a potential national emergency. They launched a search fleet within hours: warships, reconnaissance planes, sonar teams. For weeks, they combed the ocean, covering more than 1 million square miles of open water. Nothing surfaced. No oil slicks, no debris, not even a life raft. The Pacific had consumed it whole. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet control room at the U.S. Navy's Pacific Command, American analysts had also noticed the same anomaly. They were monitoring the Soviet Navy through the SOS-US network, an underwater chain of hydrophones designed to track submarine movement. When the systems analysts replayed the acoustic data from March 8th, they heard the distinct pattern of a catastrophic implosion, metal collapsing under immense pressure. By triangulating that signal from multiple listening posts, they found what the Soviets could not: a rough location of the disaster, about 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, nearly 3 miles deep. To the intelligence officers watching that data scroll across their machines, one idea slowly began to take shape. The kind of thought that could only have been born in the Cold War. If the Soviets had lost a nuclear-armed submarine out there, then it was lying on the ocean floor, with its weapons, its code books, its encryption systems, maybe even its crew. And if it could be found, if somehow it could be reached and raised, it could reveal everything. The U.S. Navy dispatched a reconnaissance ship, the USS Halibut, under the guise of a routine undersea cable inspection mission. The crew was told little. Weeks later, the Halibut arrived at the coordinates derived from SOS-US. Using deep-towed cameras and sonar equipment that had never before been tested at such depths, they began sweeping the seafloor. 16,500 feet down. Every day, the ship drifted across an invisible grid. Every night, the film from its cameras was developed in a dark room, lit only by red lamps. And one morning, there it was, a faint, grainy image of a cylindrical hull, half buried in silt, the outline of a Soviet insignia barely visible on its rusted skin. They had found K-129. For weeks afterward, the images circulated through the upper levels of the U.S. intelligence community. Men in suits and rimless glasses, leaning over light tables, pointing at blurred frames, whispering about the impossible. The CIA wanted to see more. The Navy argued it couldn't be done. And somewhere in the middle of those arguments, a single question echoed through the halls of Langley. Could we bring it up? The ocean depth alone made it absurd. At 16,500 feet, the pressure was 8 tons per square inch. No diver could ever reach it. No submarine could lift it. No crane existed that could handle the weight of a 2,000-ton hull fragment without snapping. But inside the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, there were men whose entire careers were built on doing what everyone else said was impossible. In the early 1970s, the Cold War had reached a strange balance. The United States and the Soviet Union were signing treaties, talking about arms control and smiling for cameras. But behind closed doors, the espionage war was accelerating. Spy satellites, hidden microphones, dead drops, and coded radio bursts. Every inch of advantage mattered. And inside that climate of quiet paranoia, K-129 was seen as the ultimate prize, a chance to look straight into the Soviet Union's nuclear soul. Engineers began sketching the unthinkable on chalkboards. A massive surface ship with a moon pool in its belly, from which a steel claw could be lowered down through miles of pipe. The claw would grasp the submarine and lift it slowly, inch by inch, until it was hidden inside the ship, out of sight of any Soviet eyes. It would require thousands of tons of steel, precise navigation, and a level of secrecy that bordered on madness. The CIA called it Project Azorian. To the outside world, such a ship couldn't exist. To the Soviets, it absolutely must not exist. So the agency needed a cover, something big, believable, and loud enough to distract everyone from what was really happening. They found their answer in Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire whose name had already been attached to half a dozen outlandish engineering projects. Hughes's companies had money, mystique, and most importantly, plausible deniability. In 1972, the world heard that Howard Hughes was building a ship to mine manganese nodules from the deep ocean floor, tiny metallic spheres believed to hold the future of industrial metals. The ship would be called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. The press marveled at it. The Soviets took note. And the CIA quietly signed contracts through front companies, funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into construction yards under a veil of corporate paperwork. Inside those yards, crews welded together the largest ship of its kind ever built, over 600 feet long, fitted with a central well through which a mechanical capture vehicle would descend like a steel spider. Only a handful of people knew what the ship was really for. To everyone else, even most of the engineers, it was a mining platform. When questions arose about its strange interior design or the enormous reinforced gimbal that seemed unnecessary for ore extraction, they were met with shrugs and references to proprietary Hughes innovations. At Langley, the operation drew a tight circle of planners. Code names were shuffled, compartmentalization rules written. Even within the CIA, few were allowed to know the details. The cost was astronomical. Over $350 million in 1970s money, roughly $2 billion today. But the prize was priceless. Soviet nuclear technology, encryption equipment, and whatever documents might have survived in sealed compartments. By 1974, after years of preparation, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was ready to sail. Its destination was a set of coordinates no sailor could speak aloud: 40 degrees north, 180 degrees east. The middle of nowhere. On board were CIA technicians disguised as civilians, naval officers traveling under aliases, and hundreds of contractors who believed they were mining engineers. Their instructions were simple. Don't ask questions, follow procedures, and if anyone outside the mission asks what they're doing, say nothing. Before the voyage, CIA security briefings emphasized one thing: the Soviets must never know. If they caught wind that the United States was recovering one of their nuclear subs, it could reignite the Cold War overnight. So the operation would unfold in total silence. No radio chatter, No visible military escort. Just one ship, adrift in the middle of the Pacific, pretending to scoop rocks while it reached down into the darkness for a secret buried in the deep. As the Glomar Explorer departed Long Beach, the crew lined the rails and watched California fade into the haze. For most, it was just another job. Long hours, heavy machinery, good pay. For the handful who knew, it was the beginning of one of the riskiest intelligence operations in U.S. history. The Pacific was calm at first, glassy seas, long blue horizons. But every mile farther from land meant another layer of radio silence. Below decks, in sealed compartments, the classified teams began their final calibrations. They ran simulations, tested hydraulic systems, checked the immense steel pipes that would lower the capture claw. Each section 30 feet long, each one threaded by hand. Every joint had to hold under the crushing weight of the ocean. If one failed, the entire structure could collapse, dragging the claw and the wreck into oblivion. By the time they reached the coordinates, the sea had turned gray. Winds stiffened. Swells rolled under the hull like slow-moving mountains. The crew deployed sonar arrays, confirmed the wreck's location, and began lowering the claw. It would take more than 3 days for the first sections of pipe to reach the seafloor. Each segment was bolted one after another, the ship rocking slightly with each connection. Inside the control room, tension built with every creak of metal. No one knew if the claw would even find its target, let alone lift it. 3 miles below, in total darkness, cameras guided by faint sonar outlines searched for the shape of the submarine. There it was. K-129, lying on its side, its bow twisted, its hull ruptured, the red star barely visible through layers of sediment. At that moment, for the first time since 1968, a human eye, albeit through a camera lens, saw the lost Soviet submarine again. It had taken 6 years of silence, secrecy, and impossible engineering to reach it. Now came the hardest part. The lift. The descent had taken days, and by the time the claw reached the ocean floor, everyone on board felt it. The crew walked slower. The ship creaked differently. Every conversation, every sound seemed quieter, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. Deep below, miles beneath them, the massive steel fingers of the capture vehicle extended outward like a mechanical hand, brushing silt away from the seafloor. There was no room for error. The claw had to grip the submarine in just the right place, strong enough to lift, but gentle enough not to crush the hull. In the control room, the monitors flickered with ghostly shapes, sonar readings and low-resolution video feed from the deep. The hull of K-129 appeared like a phantom, half buried in the sediment, sections twisted and broken from the implosion years earlier. Engineers argued in whispers about where to attach, tracing their fingers over the blurry images. Finally, after hours of calculations, they committed. The claw began to close. On the deck above, the wind was rising. The Pacific was dark and cold, a rolling sheet of metal under a low-gray sky. The ship groaned as it held position, computer-stabilized to stay perfectly still despite the waves. If it drifted even a few feet, the pipes could bend or snap, ending the mission in an instant. Down below, in total darkness, the claw touched the submarine for the first time. Metal on metal. After 6 years, 2 nations met again in silence. When the engineers initiated the lift, nothing seemed to happen at first. The claw didn't move, the readouts didn't change. But on the gauges, the pressure began to rise, tiny increments at a time. The submarine was moving. It took hours before the crew saw any progress. Each 30-foot segment of pipe was hauled back up to the surface, unbolted, and replaced by the next one above it. The process was like building a reverse tower through the ocean. One mistake, and the entire structure could collapse. The lift continued around the clock. Men worked in shifts, faces pale from exhaustion and artificial light. The clang of steel echoed through the decks day and night. Every now and then, the ship's stabilizers groaned under the strain, and the engineers froze. A single failure down below could send the whole wreck crashing back to the bottom. And then there was the fear no one spoke aloud. What if the Soviets came? Halfway through the lift, radar operators on the bridge noticed something. A Soviet surveillance vessel had appeared on the horizon. A trawler, at least on paper. It lingered there, just close enough to see, watching. For days it stayed, circling, drifting, pretending to fish. The crew of the Glomar Explorer kept their mining facade alive, deploying fake collection gear, holding position, broadcasting meaningless data to satellites. They smiled for cameras and pretended nothing was happening. But deep below, their secret continued. The CIA technicians slept little. They knew if that Soviet ship realized what was really going on, it could summon destroyers within hours. The entire mission would end not with a bang, but with a confrontation that could reignite the Cold War. And so they played their roles, every day, every shift, every bolt, hoping the ocean would keep their secret just a little longer. As the lift progressed, the strain on the steel riser system became immense. The engineers monitored tension readings constantly. Each number represented thousands of tons of stress. There were warning signs. A slight shudder, an unexpected vibration. They assumed it was normal. But deep below, the claw was beginning to deform. The hull of K-129 was never meant to be lifted intact. It had split into multiple sections during its descent. The claw was gripping one large portion, but that portion was fractured through the center. Every inch they raised it, the stress on that fracture line grew worse. The engineers didn't know it yet, but the submarine's weight was about to become its own undoing. By the 5th day of the lift, the tension indicators spiked. Alarms went off. The control room filled with shouts. Somewhere miles below, the metal had given way. The entire ship jolted as the weight suddenly dropped. The pipes flexed and groaned. The hydraulic dampers screamed. Then, silence. No one said anything for several seconds. They all knew what had happened. Most of K-129 had broken free. The claw still held a smaller section, the forward bow, but the rest had fallen back into the abyss, smashing into the ocean floor with unimaginable force. The room stayed silent. Some men swore under their breath. Others just stared at the screens. Years of planning, billions in funding, months at sea. And in a few seconds, the dream of raising the entire submarine had slipped away. But the mission couldn't stop. The remaining section still contained valuable material. They continued the lift, slower, more carefully than before. After endless days of strain and sleeplessness, the first glimpse of the wreck appeared through the moon pool. A jagged, rusted fragment rising from the dark water, dripping with seawater that had last touched it 6 years ago. When it finally broke the surface, men on deck stared in silence. It was smaller than they'd imagined, but heavier with meaning. Inside were 2 nuclear torpedoes, sections of mechanical systems, and, most unexpectedly, human remains. 6 Soviet sailors had come up with the wreckage, their bodies preserved in sealed compartments. For a moment, the entire ship went quiet. These were not enemies anymore. They were just men who had gone down in the line of duty long ago, in a war of silence. A few days later, the CIA crew performed a burial at sea. They draped the remains in the Soviet flag, read prayers in Russian and English, and let the weighted coffins sink back into the deep. The ceremony was recorded, the only footage of the mission that would ever see daylight. That tape would later be delivered to Russia, decades later, as a gesture of respect between old enemies. The rest of the operation continued under wraps. Engineers analyzed the recovered parts, photographing every surface, cataloging every instrument. They found traces of Soviet sonar equipment, portions of guidance systems, and some documents, but nothing close to the full treasure trove they had hoped for. Still, the CIA declared the mission a partial success. The world would never know what was recovered, and officially, nothing had happened. But secrets never stay buried forever. As the Glomar explorer sailed back toward California, journalists were already circling. Rumors had leaked from shipyard workers and contractors, whispers of a mining vessel that wasn't mining anything. And before long, reporters from the Los Angeles Times began making phone calls to Langley. The CIA panicked. The operation had cost hundreds of millions and was supposed to remain secret for decades. Now, in 1975, someone was about to publish everything. When the press asked for confirmation, the agency refused to answer. Instead, they coined a new phrase, one that would enter the language of secrecy forever. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the operation. It was called the Glomar response, named after the ship itself. And from that day forward, those words became the perfect shield for every secret the government wanted to keep hidden. But behind closed doors, not everyone saw it as a victory. Many within the CIA wondered if the cost had been worth it. The Soviets eventually learned enough to understand what had been attempted. They were outraged, though privately impressed by the sheer audacity of it all. To this day, the exact intelligence recovered remains classified. Some say the CIA gained vital data on Soviet nuclear weapons. Others believe the best material slipped away with the falling wreck. For the men who were there, it didn't matter. They remembered the long nights, the constant fear, and the endless sound of creaking steel echoing in the dark. They remembered the ocean swallowing the wreck again, as if the sea itself had decided that some things were meant to stay hidden. The Glomar explorer returned home under cloudy skies, its crew worn down by months of isolation, secrecy, and exhaustion. For those who knew the truth, there was no victory celebration. No medals, no public acknowledgement, not even a handshake from Washington. Everything they'd done was sealed away under layers of classification. They couldn't tell their families. They couldn't tell their friends. The mission didn't exist, not officially, not anywhere. In the shipyards of Long Beach, engineers began dismantling the specialized lifting gear, storing crates of strange machinery under false serial numbers. The press releases still spoke of manganese nodules and experimental mining equipment. The world's newspapers ran puff pieces about Howard Hughes and his bold new deep-sea ventures. But in quiet corners of the intelligence community, a few people whispered about what had really happened out there. They called it the submarine job. Others called it Azorian. But everyone who knew kept their voices low. Back at CIA headquarters, the after-action reports were cautious. The mission had been only a partial success, but the engineering feat was beyond anything attempted before. In secret internal memos, the Director of Central Intelligence praised the operation as a demonstration of technical audacity and operational precision. Yet, between the lines, there was an undertone of disappointment. The cost had been immense, the payoff uncertain. What they had learned, however, went beyond the wreck itself. They had proven that a ship could maintain stability in deep ocean recovery, that heavy lift systems could operate at nearly 17,000 feet, and that secrecy could hold for years in an era of satellites and spies. These lessons would ripple quietly into future covert projects, underwater reconnaissance missions, and even the birth of deep-sea oil technology years later. But secrets are fragile things, and time always finds a way to erode them. By 1975, whispers of the operation reached a handful of journalists. The Los Angeles Times ran a story hinting at an enormous CIA-funded ship used for recovering a foreign vessel. The article didn't name the K-129 or the Soviet Union, but the implications were clear. A few months later, the New York Times and Time magazine began their own investigations. Reporters filed Freedom of Information requests, demanding to know what Project Azorian really was. When the CIA was asked for comment, it faced a dilemma: deny it completely and risk being caught in a lie, or admit it and confirm a classified Cold War provocation that could destroy diplomatic progress. Instead, they created a third option. In a now famous letter, a CIA spokesperson wrote that the agency could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the requested records. It was the perfect answer, both true and untrue. That phrase became immortalized as the Glomar response, named after the ship that started it all. It became the cornerstone of secrecy, a phrase used in courtrooms, press briefings, and government responses for decades. Whenever a secret was too dangerous to reveal, that sentence was the shield. We can neither confirm nor deny. For the men who had been on that ship, though, it was less a clever line and more a quiet curse. They had lived through something extraordinary, a mission at the edge of human capability, and could never talk about it. Years later, some of them tried. A few shared vague memories under anonymity, stories of nights spent staring into black waves, of steel pipes groaning under impossible tension, of a moment when the ocean seemed to swallow an entire secret whole. But for most, silence became a habit they carried for life. The Soviets, too, eventually pieced together what had happened. Satellite photos of the Glomar Explorer showed its unique structure, and Soviet naval intelligence deduced the only possible explanation. Officially, Moscow remained furious. Unofficially, they were impressed. The idea that a rival nation had built a ship capable of retrieving a submarine from 3 miles down was beyond comprehension. It was both an act of espionage and an act of engineering genius. In later years, when relations between the US and Russia softened slightly, the CIA quietly declassified a few fragments of the story. Among them was a grainy film reel, the burial ceremony at sea. In the footage, you can see the deck crew standing in solemn formation. The Pacific stretches endlessly around them. A small Soviet flag flutters in the wind. The coffins slide slowly into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. There's no music, no speech, just the sound of the ocean. That simple act, a burial at sea for fallen enemies, became one of the only human moments ever shown from Project Azorian. It was a reminder that behind every secret, every act of espionage, there are human beings, on both sides, trying to do what they believe is right. After the mission, the Glomar Explorer never again lifted a submarine. It was later sold, repurposed, and eventually scrapped. For years it sat moored in Suisun Bay, rusting in silence. A ghost of an era when nations dreamed in secrets and built machines to touch the impossible. The ocean, though, remembers. Somewhere beneath 16,000 feet of cold Pacific water, The rest of K-129 still lies there, broken, buried, silent. Its crew still entombed inside the steel remains of a war that ended without gunfire, but left shadows that still stretch across the world. To this day, many details of Project Azorian remain classified. Even the name itself wasn't officially acknowledged until decades later. Declassified CIA documents, when finally released, were filled with blacked-out lines, pages redacted almost entirely. A visual monument to secrecy. The photographs, the technical blueprints, the recovered materials, most of them remain locked away, buried not under the ocean this time, but under the weight of bureaucracy and national security. But some truths slip through the cracks. Engineers who worked on the lifting mechanism later revealed the incredible precision required. The way the ship had to hover within inches of perfect alignment, while waves moved beneath it. They described the eerie quiet of the control room as the claw rose, and the despair when the cables snapped and the wreck fell back into darkness. They described the smell of the ocean when the first piece surfaced, the heavy silence of men watching history rise out of the deep. And perhaps that's the essence of Project Azorian, not just a secret operation, but a moment in history where human ambition touched the edges of possibility. It was proof of what people can build when they believe no one is watching. Decades later, historians still debate whether it was a success or a failure. Did the CIA get what it wanted? Was the intelligence worth the cost? No one outside those sealed archives can say for sure. But what's undeniable is that the mission changed the way intelligence was done forever. It showed that technology could achieve the unthinkable, and that secrets, even the best-kept ones, eventually float to the surface. Today, when you hear a government official say, "We can neither confirm nor deny," you're hearing the echo of that ship, the hum of its engines, the clank of steel pipes descending into black water, the whisper of men who risked everything to reach the unreachable. And if you could stand on that same patch of ocean now, in the middle of the Pacific, where the waves roll endless and grey, you'd never know what once happened beneath you. You'd see only water, calm, endless, indifferent. But deep down, under 3 miles of darkness and pressure, the ghosts of K-129 and Project Azorian still rest together. The hunter and the hunted, forever intertwined in the cold silence of the deep.